I'm the Book Baron. Welcome in, everybody. So if you are new here, my name is Baron, and today we are wrapping up February, which was quite the month for me. I read not only a lot of books, but I read some thick ones. Also, apologies in advance. You can, oh, his little lemur tail, here he comes. This is Kevin. This is my cat. He's gonna be wandering around in the background, potentially eating during the video, so you may hear some little cat crunchies. Does what he wants. He's my owner, I'm not his owner. That's how this relationship actually works. I don't want to dilly-dally too long because I have a lot of books to get to. I've got a lot of thoughts and feelings on them, so let's just jump into the books. All right, first up, we have Irreversible, and this is by Jennifer Hartman and Shelley St. Clair. This is a romantic suspense, captive, dark romance. The blurb doesn't really tell you that much, so I'm gonna give you like a little bit extra so you have a better idea of kind of what you're getting into. So the heroine is a model that's kind of having this meteoric rise. She had a photo shoot that went viral. She's getting a lot of attention, and on the way back from a big event, she is abducted. For years, she's kind of kept as this like prize pig, and the only people she really has for company are the people that she can hear through the wall, these other victims. Fast forward a couple years, the hero is a former cop now turned PI because he got kicked off the force. He became really obsessed with a case or a set of cases that he thought were very connected. I just was really frustrated by the fact that like no one seemed to be taking it as seriously as him. He ends up learning from another cop friend that they're actually planning to close the case. This really upsets him because he knows that this case is not solved. The person that admitted to it, it's not him. So he comes up with this kind of half-baked plan to try and lure out some more information or just kind of like get something moving. He ends up getting himself captured, and now he is also in part of this like black market operation, and he is one of the victims that is in the room next to the heroine, and they begin talking through the wall and trying to figure out how to escape. I'm gonna keep my thoughts brief on this as much as I can. I did DNF this one about 30% in. I was very intrigued by the heroine story because it started off very glamorous and cinematic, but when I got to the hero's perspective, I immediately found his story very confusing. I was having to try and pick up too much as context clues, and so there was a lot of conversation that was happening where I was just like, what are we talking about? I also just don't find his storyline and background very compelling. He's kind of a typical cop, and just to be 100% honest with you, I don't really like cops for my heroes or heroines. I feel like they make a lot of stupid decisions in the name of their job, which clearly happens here. It was starting to lean more into this like detective mystery feel and like more romantic suspense rather than a dark romance, which is more of what I like. And I think what added to that, I felt like the hero was an absolute jerk to the heroine for no reason. There was no valid reason for him to be so rude when they were both captive. Also, I was getting really bored when we were in captivity. They were like making up stories and sharing flashbacks and dreams and stuff. Those are things that I usually, to be frank, skim in other books. I don't find those parts compelling. And when I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be the bulk of them in captivity, it's not them processing their feelings. I'm already wanting to skim by like the second chapter. That's not a good sign, so I DNF'd it. Next up, I have Iron and Ember, and this is by Helen Schwerer. Something like that. I tried to listen to it like 4 times in the audiobook, and I just still don't know how to pronounce it. This is a high fantasy romance, and it's got like a magic school and a bodyguard. We are following Ren, who is an alchemist, and she's royalty who fought in this very big war. So this is actually interconnected with her previous series. I think the first book for that is like Iron and Ember or something like that. Nope, not Iron and Ember. That's this book. I'm a genius. Blood and Steel? That sounds more correct. Anyways, those books kind of like cover the war, so this kind of takes place after. She lost a bunch of friends in that war, and kind of in an act of revenge through these people that left over that she feels like weren't sufficiently punished for their crimes, she's been going around assassinating people using her kind of alchemist background to become a poisoner. When there starts to become these mysterious alchemical attacks against royals, that's when they finally agree to provide a recommendation for her to go to Drevnar, which is this very dangerous alchemy academy. It's meant for the elite. This is for the best of the best to go to. There's a lot of danger around every corner, and there's a lot of secrets. Because there is this threat against royals, they end up sending her with a bodyguard, and that's Torch. And Torch is someone that she fought with in the war, and they had this kind of simmering tension over the years, but she was so caught up in her vendetta, she just wasn't in a place to really have a relationship. Through these events, they are now forced back together, and the tension's there immediately. Thoughts on this one? I just wanted to give you like mild warning that if you do ever plan to read Blood and Steel series that I mentioned earlier, this could potentially kind of spoil some things. But if you're not interested in that series and you're just interested in this one, you do not need to have read that prior series in order to have enough context. The author did a really great job of making it really easy to just be able to jump into this book. The heroine I really liked. It was a lot of exploring her PTSD, her survivor's guilt, her intense independence because she lost a lot of people that she relied upon. She almost reminded me of like a really matured version of Nesta. I adore the hero. I adore the hero. He was just so lovely and just so desperately wanted to show the heroine like, hey, you don't have to be hyper independent. Like, you can depend on me. But also respected her enough to know that like, hey, we want different things and I'm not going to engage with you and even start anything when we're not on the same page. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you pick up the audiobook because the male narrator is incredible. His ability to do different voices so convincingly for so many different characters, I was so deeply impressed. My only complaint with this book really is that the ending, I got a little frustrated because I could kind of see what was going to happen, is it leads to a thing I don't like in sequels. So I'm giving it a rating of 4 stars, but know that that's just because that ending made me mad. All right, next up I have Blaire by Anita Gray. So this is a dark romance. It's captive, first in a series, but the series is incomplete and I don't think it'll ever be completed. We have our heroine, Blaire. I know, revolutionary, who would have thought? She was captured as a child and trained more or less to be kind of like this bodyguard and just serve all the whims of Maxim Markov, who is very high up in the Russian mafia. So for the past 10 years, she's basically been part of this criminal organization. She doesn't really know anything different at this point. And life's pretty predictable for her until an old friend of Maxim's re-enters his life named Charlie, and Charlie comes in and immediately takes an interest in Blaire and ends up being gifted her as a form of payment for a debt, but it's for only 3 months. She will eventually have to go back to Maxim, but he is determined to break her training during that time. This is a book from my priority reads list from last year that I just never got around to, so I thought I'd read it real quick. It's pretty action-packed in the beginning. It has a very like action movie thriller feel. So the captive situation's very unique compared to a lot of others that I've read in the past because she's untethered. She's not like kept in a room, but she has been trained so well, she only does what she's told. It's really quite character driven. It's single POV from the heroine's perspective. I think where this really ended up missing the mark for me though, is that it didn't really like dive into the psychological elements and that conflict that she's experiencing. I didn't feel that emotional tie to Maxim, and so the premise of the book kind of just falls apart. The other thing, the hero's Spanglish is so bad. It's so bad, you guys. It's about as authentic as Taco Bell. Threw me out of the book constantly. It was so corny, so corny. And honestly, the mystery, like thriller aspects just never really paid off for me in a way that I found like exciting. I'm giving it a rating of 2 stars. Super disappointed because this is a highly beloved book. Next up, I have Priest by Sierra Simone, and this is a first and interconnected. I think the series is literally called Priest, and it's a taboo priest romance. How many times can I say priest? I'm gonna say it one more. Tyler Bell's a priest. So he had kind of sowing his wild oats era of his life before becoming a priest. That's going pretty well for him until a gal comes into his confessional and she's feeling a little bit lost. She wants to admit to some sins of a very carnal nature. So this leads to the breaking of some celibacy vows. So thoughts on this one? This is single POV from his perspective. And I think it has a lot of the elements of the other books because I've read the other 2 that are in this series. We've got the spice and tension, and then we've got this kind of like wrestling with bigger questions. I did feel like this one leaned a lot heavier on the spice aspects and almost didn't build those up quite as much as the other 2 books. So it just left it feeling a little bit weaker than the other ones. I think there was really great character development overall, but I think like a lot of the actual like romance story, I never quite fell in love with that part of it. I definitely think the other books in the series are much stronger. So I'm giving this one a 3.5. I enjoyed it, but it's definitely my least favorite in the series. All right, now we're gonna quickly try and get through some of the ones that I read for a vlog. So I will link that here. Nailed it. The first one that I have for you is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. So this is a fantasy romance. It's first in a series. The next book doesn't come out until October, so this is incomplete at this point. I don't really know if this is planned to be, like, how long the series is planned to be. But so more or less the lore of this world that kind of like sets the scene is that there is this world where dragons exist. They were created by a god. Upon the demise of the dragons, they prefer to go up into the sky and more or less become moons, although sometimes that does not happen. That kind of becomes their final resting place, but on occasion they fall out of the sky and leave moon shards everywhere. So that's one god that kind of established part of this world, but the primary gods seem to be ones that are elemental gods. And the people in power in this world can hear more of the gods. So you don't want to be a person that can hear none, because you can hear none all the way up to all of them. Although that's really, really rare. Most royalty can hear at least 3. That's the scene. Our heroine is a bounty hunter for the rebellion, and she's partly there by choice, partly there through some compulsion, but she ends up getting caught on one of her latest hits. So the guild nobles, it's usually people that can hear 2 different gods. They want to make a political statement because she was kind of picking off their tier of people, and so she is being held in this prison. That's when she comes in contact with a man named Khan, and Khan has been hunting for these moon shards, which is how he kind of ends up in this prison, and he has stumbled upon what can only be described as a miracle. So he immediately takes a very keen interest in her. I adored this book. This is a 6-star. I absolutely love this. I want to give this all the stars. I feel like I only ever get like one killer fantasy every year. This year it appears to be When the Moon Hatched. I absolutely love the pining between the hero and heroine. I felt like the hero was like the right level of gruff and broody, but not cruel. He was always kind of like responding to the heroine's like threats and intensity and attitude. And the heroine, she can dish it out. She is so sassy throughout. She is a gal that can actually get stuff done. She is a truly strong fighter. Although I would say that the beginning is kind of confusing and the writing kind of oscillates between this sort of like modern speaking and this sort of like whimsical imagery. It's definitely going to be an acquired taste and it's not going to work for everybody. So just a heads up with that, but I am absolutely in love with this book. All right, next up we have Full Moon Rising by Ruby Dixon. First in a new series. It's a fantasy romance and it's got a marriage of convenience. So this one, the heroine's father more or less gambles away their artifacts, which is like a form of currency for the nobility here. She decides that she's gonna run away to try and help him out and join the artifact guild so she can dig up more of these artifacts and then get them to her father and kind of like save her land, save her title. Unfortunately, she's like really book smart, but she's not very like street smart. She doesn't realize that women need permission in order to join the guild. Hello, sexism. And she can't go to her father because she ran away. And so she kind of comes up with this plan. She ends up propositioning this guy that's like this bull. I can't remember what they call them. The Minotaurs. Jesus Christ. I'm not well. A Minotaur that would be teaching her fledgling class. And she was like, hey, you need another person in your fledgling class. I need someone to sign off for this. You also need someone to go into rut with. I have a hole. So that's how they get going. So she helps him out with the rut and they get married and he signs off and becomes her guardian so she can be in the guild. So this sounds like it should be high stakes. They're very low stakes, very cozy feeling actually. I didn't love the romance. I felt like it was entirely driven not by any like intimacy or connection or chemistry, but mostly by a lot of plot conveniences. Basically this rut makes him just want to like bone anything that has a hole. The other thing, I really didn't like the heroine. She is supposed to be in her 30s. She acts like a 15-year-old. Also interestingly oscillated between really flowery old-timey language, but then would just drop like modern slang very abruptly. I couldn't get on with it, primarily because of the heroine. So DNF that one, no rating. Next up, I have Unsteady by Peyton Corinne. It's a first in an interconnected series. This is a contemporary new adult sports romance, primarily kind of features Reese, our hero. So he had an accident with hockey and he's still kind of in the process of recovering. He's got a lot of PTSD and anxiety symptoms that are cropping up for him. And his dad is trying to get him back out onto the ice. And so he's like, hey, can you participate and kind of help out with this like low income youth camp? He ends up kind of taking an interest in 2 boys in particular because their guardian doesn't show up on time. And he kind of gives her like a little bit of a talking to where he's like, hey, you need to be an involved guardian. She doesn't take very kindly to this because she's like, I don't need to explain myself to you. But our heroine is trying to maintain a scholarship, go to college, work, raise her brothers. And so these comments do not go over well. She's like, you don't even know what you're talking about. So they're kind of off to a bad start. But both of them, because she's trying to maintain a skating scholarship and because he's trying to get more ice time to like work through these panic attacks, they both end up going early to the arena to get some additional ice time. This is when he's having a really severe panic attack. He's very early on in this journey and she ends up helping him through it. And after that, they just kind of continuously bump into each other. Thoughts on this one? This one was very character driven to the point that it almost felt slice of life because for me, I didn't really get why the ending ended where it did. So to me, it almost feels more slice of life because of that. I did really love the relationship that the hero and heroine had. I felt like they were really showing up in these like raw, intense moments and were really the only person that was able to do that because both characters aren't really letting anybody else in. I did feel like towards the end that there was like a few too many elements going on. So I feel like the ending kind of felt weakened a little bit, but overall I gave this a rating of 4 stars. Then we moved on to Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This is her newest standalone. It's a new adult sports romance. Scarlett is a diver and a pre-med student. She's a little bit of an overachiever, but she's kind of been struggling with a particular dive ever since she had an accident. And basically, in order to continue competing, she needs to fix that. So her diving captain ends up taking her under her wing, but she's also in the process of breaking up with her boyfriend, who is this like really well-known Swedish Olympian that also happens to swim for their swim team. Good God, how many times can I say that? But they're just finding that they want different things out of their college experience and also different things in the bedroom. He's into some kinkier things than she is. The heroine, because she kind of shares some like complementary proclivities, decides that she's gonna try and lend this non-judgmental ear to this like new friend of hers, this person that's kind of been helping her out, and just illuminates maybe a little bit of like where her boyfriend's coming from and kind of shares some details of like a previous relationship she had. Ultimately, those two end up breaking up, and when her new friend ends up having a few too many drinks, she's like, you know what? You two actually would get along really well in the bedroom. You guys should fuck. This one, I enjoyed the relationship in certain ways because I liked their approach. They were very intentional, but it was still very steamy. But I didn't really feel the chemistry too much when we were kind of like day to day. Didn't feel like they ever reached those upper levels of intimacy and that relationship. And I think part of that is I just didn't really know who Lucas was. He never really felt like he opened up or really got real with his feelings. My biggest pet peeve that totally ruined this book, frankly, for me was that I didn't like the heroine's friend at all. It starts off with little like backhanded digs. It starts off with inserting herself in places and revealing secrets that she shouldn't have, slightly talking down to her, being judgmental, but it escalates worse and worse throughout the book. I didn't like how this was represented as like an actual female friendship that should be celebrated or that they were truly good friends. Like, this is such a toxic, fucked up relationship and it just never gets addressed. I got really frustrated towards the end of the book and it really soured my opinion of this book. So I think it needs to be a 3-star. So those were all the books that were in the vlogs. Now let's move on to other books that I've read. Ooh, the sun's gonna start doing weird things, so I'm really sorry if the lighting starts getting strange. So first up we have Bound by Duty, and this is by Cora Riley. This is the second book in an interconnected series of mafia romances. It's a dark mafia romance, marriage of convenience, and a damaged hero. We have Dante, and he is set to become the capo of the Chicago outfit. His wife died about 4 years ago, and he's kind of been a little bit haunted by her memory. He's not really ready to move on, but he needs to. Being the capo and being not married looks very weak to a lot of people. So he ends up selecting Valentina, who also lost her husband. That was kind of a marriage for her that was in name only. And she's been kind of like weighted down by these secrets, and she's very nervous going into this relationship and this marriage with Dante because she's like, oh no, Capo's gonna find out the secrets of my dead husband and find out some of my secrets. Dante unfortunately ends up ignoring her, so she kind of worried all for nothing. But now she's kind of dealing with another issue, which is that she was ignored in her first marriage and now she's being ignored in this one. She's like, I just want a real relationship. I'm so sick of being cast aside. And she's like really determined to try and get his attention in any way she can. Thoughts on this one? I knew even from the blurb what her secret was gonna be. I felt like it was really obvious. I don't know if that was like that cool of a reveal, but I really did hurt for the heroine of just like wanting so desperately to be loved and just feeling like no one ever cared about her, that she was just kind of like a pawn in this mafia game and just wanting someone to really see her. The hero, I have kind of mixed feelings about him because I liked his relationship with Valentina and like how he was kind of working through his own trauma and damage of feeling like he was kind of betraying his wife's memory, but also being so intrigued and attracted to this woman. But you know, he's kind of got that mafia background, so he's not supposed to reveal these intimate details about himself. Where I kind of got like a little bit iffy with him is that there is a DV situation that's going on in this book and he doesn't care. I was pretty upset by that because I felt like he could have, as the capo, could have been more creative about how he solved this issue. And I felt like because he just refused to intervene in any way, just my opinion of him kind of went down. The main bulk of the story, like the relationship between Valentina and Dante, I really liked. This one has a lot more flaws that are hard to overlook for me, but my enjoyment level is like a 4-star, but I think if I was truly to be a little bit more objective, I'd be looking at like more like a 3-star. All right, next up, I have Blood of Desiderium by Ali Stube. So sorry to Allie. This is the first in a series. It's a fantasy romance. In this world, Fae possess powers, but Princess Emma has been collared by her father, and her father controls her every move. And so she's kind of kept away in this palace, no freedom, no control. She finds out that there's evil infiltrating her lands that like no one was telling her about. She is betrothed to someone. She is friends with them, but doesn't love them. And so her life's not going in a direction that she likes, but she's got dark secrets all her own, and she's got to find a way to save her people. So thoughts on this? I did end up DNFing this book about like halfway through. I just felt like this book was really trying way too hard to be the book that it was. It felt very tropey, very corny. It's the childhood friend who she doesn't love, but he loves her, and maybe he doesn't have her best interest in mind after all when she doesn't reciprocate his feelings. Loves her fighting leathers more than those icky, frilly dresses. Blah. The dialogue felt really stiff and unnatural because it's like, these are the things that this character in this archetype is supposed to say. It's just too much of like recycled things from other books, and I just felt like so many of the scenes were just like a stilted cardboard version of what I should be feeling or how the story should like play out. I also found the world building to be really awkward and info dumpy. Again, no rating. This was a DNF. I'm really disappointed. I was really excited about this book, and this cover is absolutely killer. It's so beautiful. All right, next up I have Sunlight by Devney Perry. So this is the second in an interconnected series called Haven River Ranch. This is primarily surprise pregnancy and sort of reverse Grumpy Sunshine or Black Cat Golden Retriever kind of feel. The heroine on her first day in town kind of gets into a scuffle with the grocery store owner because she wants to take the shopping cart to her apartment that's just like a couple blocks down the way, and the grocery store owner is like, you're gonna steal it from me. So they end up getting into this tussle. The hero ends up stepping in to help out, decides to ask her out on a date, and initially she's kind of like, sure, but when she finds out his name, she very politely turns him down because although he's not her boss, he owns the ranch that she is going to be working at very shortly. So when she starts her first date, she basically pretends she doesn't know him. And this is the first time that they've met. Even though she's kind of like harbors a little bit of a crush on him, they end up having a holiday party and she has a little too much to drink and they end up giving in for just one night. After that, they cannot really ignore each other because she's pregnant. I really liked this version of Black Cat and Golden Retriever because I really felt like it was a little bit softer and really realistic. Like the heroine is kind of prickly because it's clear that she's uncomfortable and she realizes she doesn't fit in and she's feeling a lot of judgment. She's a city girl that's kind of out of her element. The hero, I absolutely adore. His internal dialogue is so funny. He's so flirty. He's trying to be so smooth. He's so desperate for the heroine to like him. And his facade is like so easily ruined because you get in his head and he's like, she likes me, right? Wait, what did that smirk mean? Was that a sexy smirk? Was that a mean smirk? Oh, that was a sexy smirk. Okay, I totally knew it. She totally likes me. Wait, why'd she do that thing? She doesn't like me, does she? So It had me laughing because you're just watching him like cycle through these things, or like he knows she's gonna come into his office, and so he's just like act super cool. And so he's like, quick, get my boots up on my desk. And make it seem like I'm really like laid back, and she, you know, she kind of interprets that as like him being like a dick and thinking that he's like better than her. So it just, their dynamic had me laughing. I really liked it. A lot of this is very soft, very sweet. It still had these kind of like tough emotional moments because we had some childhood trauma. So ultimately I end up giving this one a rating of 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. All right, next up I have Born to be Bound, and this is by Addison Kane. This is a first in a proper series, and it's a dystopian Omegaverse captor captive. Shepard is an alpha that has basically broken out of his underground prison that used to be under the city. So in this dystopia, the cities are in domes, and they put their convicts underground. When he breaks out, he ends up absolutely destroying civilization. Chaos absolutely reigns, and his control is pretty absolute. Like, what he says goes. So Omegas in this world then have to go into hiding because they can't really like go out and get food, and it's very difficult for them to gain resources. So Claire is kind of elected as their rep, go about the dangerous task of trying to ask Shepard to help them out with getting food. Unfortunately, when she gets around Shepard, her heat is triggered, and he brutally claims her and bonds her for himself and really demands everything from her. So, does anyone ever think that it's weird that we pronounce Shepard Shepard and not Shefford? It is a PH. Random thoughts I have. Anyways, so this is in third person, which was a little bit confusing at first because changes in perspective aren't denoted through chapter changes ever or sections changing over. Like, there's a lot of head hopping within a scene, so it takes a little minute to get used to the writing. You get more perspectives than just like what's going on with the hero and heroine. Sometimes there's scenes that are entirely about like other people. I think because of that, it was a little difficult for me to figure out at first like where this was going. I didn't really know what the plot was, and the mix of like scenes that I wasn't really sure what they were there for. Sometimes I had a hard time staying invested in what was going on. I was intrigued by the hero, but I had a really hard time liking him because you almost learn nothing about him. You don't really get the sense of like Stockholm syndrome that you do in a lot of other captives, because a lot of what's going on that he's using to control her isn't psychological so much as using her Omega biology against her. It doesn't have a love-hate relationship or this like I'm relying upon you. I just felt like that psychological piece needed to be like baked out further because I really felt like that was missing from this story. Despite all these issues, really compelled to continue to read because I really wanted answers. I wanted to know more of what was going on, and you know, why had he bonded her? Why was he keeping her captive? Why does she have to stay in this room? There was just like a lot that I was like, oh, I really want answers, but I felt like we kind of were stuck in this room, and like the same types of scenes would kind of happen, and then like maybe something different would happen, but then we would like come back to the same set of scenes. We finally get some answers towards the end of the book, but it was like part of the cliffhanger. And although it was like really heartbreaking, really gut-wrenching, I feel really conflicted about whether or not I want to continue, just because the bulk of the book, I didn't really enjoy the reading experience. I don't know if I'll continue on with this series. I'm pretty conflicted, especially because it's not on KU, and I don't really want to pay like $6-7 to find out that I still hate the reading experience. I'm giving this a rating of 3 stars. I was pretty disappointed with this read. Next up, I have My Choice Is You, and this is by Mel Dowse. This is a standalone. It's a contemporary romance. Covey is the daughter of a very famous former baseball player, and she is kind of well known in her community because she is the face of an autism foundation because she has autism herself. Her father has been pretty protective of her, and she's also lived a pretty privileged life, so she knows that she's pretty ignorant of a lot of things and needs to really like branch out and really just like stretch her wings a little bit. So one of the things that she plans to do is to get a roommate. And it's actually through the process of meeting her roommate that she ends up meeting her roommate's brother, Jasper, who owns like clubs in the areas. He's a business owner. And although he's very taken by her, thinks that Covey's very beautiful, enjoys her company, he isn't really looking for love. He's kind of got a life that he has curated in a very specific way, and it doesn't involve relationships. Thoughts on this? This does have a very like telling style of writing, but I felt like it really worked with Covey's autism and personality. I felt like that was actually like a really good writing style for her perspective. She's very blunt and in ways that end up being kind of unintentionally funny. And I love that the hero was really drawn to that. I also really love that the heroine called out the hero and other people around her for treating her like she was stupid or kind of infantilizing her. She's like, look, I miss social cues. I'm not an idiot. I will warn you, there's a lot of other woman drama. Weirdly, it didn't bother me. And I think the ending might not work for some people. So just kind of a heads up with that. But overall, I really enjoyed this and I gave it a rating of 4 stars. I read this in like one sitting. I sat down and burned through the whole thing. So, all right, hopefully I can make it through the rest of this video before the lighting gets too weird. Next up I have Shattered Omega, and this is by Marie Mackay. This is first in a series and it's a dark new adult Omegaverse. The heroine remembers nothing of the previous like 19 years of life. She's told that she is not a regular Omega. There's something wrong with her scent, and that she actually seems to repel alphas. While she's being held kind of, or is stowed away at her uncle's mansion, these alphas end up coming by, and it turns out she does have a scent match. So she knows pretty immediately that she needs to find a way to get to them. She hatches this plan to run away to this academy that they're going to and reveal herself, and she's like, this is gonna solve all of my problems. Problem is, before she can do that, there is another pack of alphas that end up inserting themselves and they want her. And they are obsessive and possessive and they don't really care what she wants. They don't want her to find her scent matches. Thoughts on this? I felt like the heroine was pretty easily broken through most of this book. It was kind of hard because so much of her plight happens before we meet her that she's already kind of got this sense of like being beaten down. The boys were interesting. They started off really brutal and really rough. They're a lot softer than they seem, or even the initial scene made them seem, because that one was like really rough. A lot of that was more so like they would present like a nicer option for her, and if she rejected it, then they would kind of prod her towards it. Everyone's got a ton of trauma going on. Yeah, lots of memories that we're kind of like rifling through to kind of figure out like what's all happened. And there's this kind of like promise of this greater plot that you don't really ever get insight into in this first book. Rating of 3.5 stars, enjoyed it overall, but just wanted like a little bit more from like the plot side of things. Next up I have House of Night, and this is by Celia Aaron. So I was really excited. I did receive an arc of this one, but this is a first in a new series that she's writing. I believe it's a trilogy. It's a dark vampire apocalyptic dystopian type romance. It's slow burn and we have amnesia. Basically, the world at large has kind of been destroyed, and in particular, we're in the US. So the government's been destroyed and vampires have overtaken. They're wiping out humans pretty systematically in this like sort of war. If that doesn't get humans, then there's a plague that'll get them instead. Heroine ends up kind of like coming into consciousness in this cage of half-dead people. She's got a lot of gaps in her memories. Everything's kind of fuzzy and hazy when she comes to. These vampires come in and they need to select kind of like the best that they have left to give off to some loyalists as like blood banks and playthings, and she's given to the head vampire's basically like only remaining son. He is the head general of this like vampire army, and his name is Valen. Because she's kind of got these gaps in her memory, and this head vampire knows that she was in attendance when his son and proper heir was killed. He wants Valen to continue investigating with the help of like another loyalist to figure out what happened. He wants to know what she knows. She finds herself trapped in this underground castle. She's trying to figure out how to escape, constantly having threats against her life at every turn, and she's gonna have to be really, really crafty if she wants to stay alive. This book is so incredibly immersive. Like from page 1, you are in, and the plot kind of feels like if Manacled, A Discovery of Witches, and a Vampire Apocalypse like movie got chucked into a blender. It feels very heavily kind of like Dramoyne coded. She's trying to stay alive. She's trying to figure out how to get out of this castle. She's trying to remember all these gaps in her memories, and she knows that there's so much missing. She knows more about Valen than what she can remember. She knows this isn't the first time that they've met. A lot of the book is not only building out the world and figuring out what politically is going on, but also kind of rediscovering little bits of her memory. So you get these like little nuggets of information, and there's like secrets and reveals kind of around every corner. Because of that though, this is slow burn. This relationship is going to, I'm gonna assume, take the majority of the series to kind of like get going. And you don't really get any spice. You do get these interactions that are very tension filled. You get some like little sexy interactions. The payoff isn't there yet.
Hello, 'tis I with a beautiful freeze frame once more. Yes, I know we're very deep into the video, but I felt it was necessary to really re-emphasize this is slow burn. There's almost no time on page with hero and heroine together. It's very, very limited. There are a few scenes, not a ton. It's mostly her exploring this house, trying to figure out how to get out of this underground mansion and figuring out what's going on in this world. It reads like the first part of Manacled because it's literally just world building. So I really wanted to re-emphasize that so nobody was disappointed. Okay, hopefully I have sufficiently impressed this point upon you, and now we shall resume the video.
And in true Celia Aaron style, she left us with a wicked cliffhanger. The promise of more is right there. It's right there. I'm so excited to read the next book. I'm in it. I'm invested. I'm excited. I want to know what's going on. And one more thing that I'll say, if you have any issues with blood, gore, kind of more horror style elements, don't pick this up. Because it's bloody, it's gory, it's gruesome. It has such this incredible cinematic feel. Like you can feel this book playing out in your mind. Like you know what it would look like as a movie. It's just the vibes are there. This is a 4.5 stars. I absolutely loved this. Oh my God, I'm so excited for the rest of the series to come out. Next up I have Amid Cloud and Bones, and this is by Ella Field. So this is a standalone fantasy romance. This is about our heroine who is a half human, half fae. She is engaged, or betrothed, I guess, at a very young age to marry a very brutal and heartless fae prince as part of this alliance between humans and one of the fae courts. I don't remember. So they kind of continuously have these like little encounters at like balls and stuff like that. And he really just shows how like brutal and heartless he is this entire time. She knows that this is going to end up being the rest of her life. So she needs to figure out how to kind of match him, just like maintaining her sanity through this relationship. Just as she thinks she's kind of succeeding and finding a way to make this work, through a twist of fate, she is delivered into the hands of his enemy. My thoughts on this. I felt like the verbal sparring was actually really good in this. I loved that the heroine's head for games was really on par with the heroes. She doesn't break just because he's kind of done a few things to her. She's like, I'm just gonna get more crafty. But I think like this world just felt a little bit too tropey, and it was like, it felt like there was so much effort put into trying to do something like a little bit extra, a little bit different to be like, see, it's unique. There was just so many different elements and tropes that kind of got thrown in that it weirdly felt like there was too much going on for a standalone and not enough. You actually, for a good portion, do not know if the hero is going to be her betrothed or his enemy. It was hard to be invested in either of the relationships as a result because you're kind of trying to build two different romances. I didn't feel like there was enough page time with the final romance to really feel like I was really invested in that relationship. I just felt like this had like a lot of potential, but just like left too many cards on the table and relied too heavily on tropes. So I think for me, this is a rating of 3 stars. You know what? I just realized I missed a book. So hold on. Whoopsies. So Slaying the Shadow Prince by Helen, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Schwerer, something like that. So sorry, Helen. I always mispronounce it. So this is a fantasy romance. It's a standalone, but once again is basically interconnected with both of the Thesmar series that she has. So we have our hero, Talamir, and he is kind of coming into town because he has found that the blades that they are using against the Wraiths in their war are not working as well. And so they suspect that someone has been tampering with them. The person that they suspect is who they believe to be the son of this nobleman. Turns out, not his son. It's his daughter, Drew. She was at one point a noblewoman. She had to turn into a ranger, and she's kind of become like part of the war herself and is trying to defend her fallen kingdom. So she doesn't really take very kindly to the fact that he is accusing her of tampering with the steel. And very quickly upon encountering Talamir, she realizes that he is somehow tied to the Wraiths. He's got something going on because she has a very special bracelet that has been treated in a specific way to indicate to her when Wraiths are around so she can't be taken by surprise. And it starts going off when she's around him. She's like, I know your dirty little secret. So you're coming here trying to accuse me of stuff? I think you're working for the enemy. I don't trust you. There ends up being an attack, and one of the people from her community ends up going missing that she cares a lot about. and she realizes maybe telomere isn't the total enemy that she first thought him to be, and those two end up teaming up and figuring out a way to kind of bring these people back to their community. So I gotta be honest, I don't have a ton of thoughts about this book. I didn't find anything about it like bad, but I just felt very meh throughout reading it. There were some moments where I really loved the hero and his vulnerability. I really enjoyed the heroine and kind of like her chutzpah, but like for the most part, like I just kind of felt like this was like an okay read. It filled the time. I think I'm somewhere between like a 3 and a 3.5 stars on this one, because like literally I forgot that I even read it. So that's not like a great sign. Next up, and the last one that I have for you finally, is a chunker. We have Fairy Tale by Veronica Lancet. So this is a standalone. It's a historical, dark, paranormal, gothic fantasy romance. So this is set in 1955. Have Miss Darcy O'Sullivan. So she is an English teacher in Boston. She grew up as an orphan, but learns after her biological father's passing that she is part of his will. Only condition for her inheritance is that she has to travel to Fairdale for her father's funeral and the reading of the will. When she arrives in this small town, it's very eerie, very creepy. Darcy immediately encounters strange residents. People outside the town are like, look out for the people there. It's all these billionaires and criminals. But it's here that she ends up meeting a very intriguing character named Caleb Hale. So he's sort of a broody member of a very notorious, very famous Hale family, which is one of the founders of the town. Weirdly though, when Darcy goes to sleep, she is not haunted by this town, but these dreams of an entirely different life in which she is in love with a man named Armand d'Artant, who is this kind of charming nobleman back in England, back in like, I think it's the 18 or 1700s. She's trying to make sense of this almost new world that she's finding herself in. Darcy is really beginning to question her sanity, but there's lots of bizarre happenings here. It's very difficult to tell what's real, what's not, and there's constant threats against her life, and is forcing Darcy to start making some decisions in order to survive. This is another priority read that was left over from last year. The vibes, the gothic elements of this are really heavy in this book. It's very eerie, very spooky. It feels like a horror movie when you're first starting out, and it's impossible to tell what's real and what's not. I think your mileage is gonna vary a lot on this book, because depending on whether you like those vibes and you like the mystery part of this and this slow build of piecing everything together, if you don't like that part, I don't think you're gonna like the bulk of this book. One thing I didn't super love is that the writing is a bit clunky. I found it's just a little bit it's a little bit too explanatory. At times this works in your favor because there is so much going on that sometimes there's a little bit of like, hey, let's put these pieces together real quick. But other times it felt unnatural the way things were kind of being written or the way dialogue would occur. The romance takes a bit, because you're dealing with basically two different romances. And then on top of that, they both do things, or there's like rumors about both of them that make you not trust them, and they do things to make you not trust them. So you have a hard time kind of like falling for their charms, because there's always this little like warning bell going off in the back of your brain. It takes about, and this is a long book, this is like 700, 800 pages. It takes 30% of the book to even really start getting answers, but you don't truly know what's going on until about like 70-80% of the way into the book. But the romance is quite sweeping once you get to those kind of like final pieces, and the spice is, that shit is feral. I don't know how else to describe that. The biggest thing though that really frustrated me with this is that you know that there's two storylines going on, right? You've got the romance with Caleb and the romance with Armand, and these two were intertwined very well. But there's also like a third story that's hinted at occasionally. The problem is this third story gets dumped on you like 70-80% into the book. So all of a sudden, at the peak of action, at the peak of tension, at the peak of putting everything together, you basically have to like start over with a new story and build that all the way up. And then once that's built up, then you can come back to these two stories. And that totally broke tension for me, and I got so bored during that portion. I struggle to rate it. I'm struggling to kind of recommend it. I like it in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of flaws with this book too, so it's kind of a tricky one for me. I'm somewhere between 3.5 and 4 stars. Those are all the books that I have for you for February. I think I had like 17 that I end up talking about. I would love to know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are on them. I read a lot of popular books, especially Deep End. I really want to know a lot of other people's thoughts on Deep End because I feel like I'm kind of the only one that feels kind of lukewarm about it. I would also love to know what you read and loved this month. I want to add more to my TBR like I usually do, like a little feral raccoon. So definitely drop those in the comments as well. I want to know what you guys are reading and loving. But with all of that, thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like this video if you do end up liking it. Subscribe if you want more content from me. And I really, really, really do hope that I see you on my next video. Bye-bye.